The difference between God who created mankind in Genesis 1:27 and the Lord God who formed mankind in Genesis 2:7. These two differences are too commonly overlooked. In Matthew 19:4, when Christ answered and said to them, the Pharisees, "Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said that for this reason the man shall leave his father and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh? So then they are no longer two but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate." The first thing Jesus said was, "Have you not read?" Jesus expected us to know Genesis and to be able to distinguish between the Spirit of God, the creator of man and woman, from the Lord who formed man in chapter 2. God is the He who created and made man both male and female in Genesis 1:27. This was ages before Adam was formed by the Lord God in Genesis 2:7. In this lesson, we are going to explore the differences between the Spirit of God as spelled out in Genesis 1:27 from the Lord God of Eden in Genesis 2:3. From now on, you will be able to see a clear distinction between the two entities and understand why the Lord separated from God after chapter 3 and then operated separately in Genesis 4 and beyond. This topic is extremely important to know going forward because of the confusion of the languages. Most people don't realize that there is a difference between the Spirit of God outlined in chapter 1:25-28 as the creator of the heavens and earth, the beast of the earth and mankind, from the Lord God who formed Adam and the beast of the field in Genesis 2:7, 8, and 19. There's a difference between God, the Spirit, and the Lord, who is a man walking with the Spirit of God. The Lord walked with God in Genesis 2:3, but after the Lord cursed Adam, the Lord and God separated. If you look closely at chapter 4, you will see that God is no longer in front of the term Lord. Lord is a synonym for master, someone having authority over another. As a matter of fact, God has no part in chapter 4 or 11. God was only mentioned once by Eve at the end in verse 25 when Seth was born. Eve said, "For God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed." 26, as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. Discreetly at the end of Genesis 4, it says men began to call on the name of the Lord. Well, who the Lord is going unquestioned, unchecked, and overlooked, because in Genesis 2:3, the two entities are conflated as one. So their separation in chapter 4 goes unnoticed. Chapter 3 and 8 defines the Lord God as man who, or as a man who they heard the sound of, right? They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. If they heard the sound of the Lord God walking specifically in the cool of the day, which is in the evening, this is why Adam's named his wife Eve in Genesis 3:20, right? Atom was the evening deity in Kemet. Seth and Adam are both offspring of Kemet, or ancient Egypt, ancient deities. Atum was called the evening or setting sun, and Seth representing the darkness after the sun has set, i.e. sunset. Adam is associated with the creation of mankind, and Seth represents darkness and the destruction of the dark people in the dark world down under Assyria, Africa, and the underworld. So Adam was named after Atum, and this is why Adam is thought of as the first man in the Bible, despite the fact that both Havilah and Cush names were mentioned first in Genesis 2:11 through 13, before Adam was named in Genesis 2:19. Later we'll dive more into that. The fact that Adam and Eve were able to hide among the trees give you enough information to figure out the conditions that they were living in. We know Eden was a plantation in a hot tropical environment near the river, characteristic of the Nile River Valley. Whenever you visit Cairo, you can feel its heat. But when you travel southward, past Luxor towards Aswan, you will definitely understand that there are new levels of heat deep in the Sudan. The Assyrian climate was semi-arid, dry with more rain than the sub-Saharan. Genesis 2 begins with two problems: rain and no man to till the ground. For the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. Right? The Creator God could, of course, cause rain. God caused the floods, but the Lord cannot control the weather. Therefore, he learned to use the flooding Nile River as a solution to his first agricultural problem. But a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground. Now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it parted and became Four River Head. Then in verse 7, the Lord formed man of the dust, not out of the dust. The word form specifically means to shape and configure something. For an example, the sheep was formed from the ram-looking mouflon. God created the beast of the earth in Genesis 1:25. In the same verse where the Lord formed the beast of the field, Adam was named, right? In verse 19, right? In Genesis 2:19, out of the ground, the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called each living creature, that was its name. Notice Adam isn't named until the domesticated creatures were formed, and the word formed is used for the third time in chapter 2. More about that later, but for now, we are establishing that Adam was domesticated like the domesticated animals. All right. If you were to Google the history of domesticated sheep, you will see that the process is traced back to Mesopotamia. This fact is represented by Abel and Abram, who were both keepers of sheep. Notice the wordplay in Genesis 12:16, how Abram's livestock included both male and female servants, placed cleverly between male and female donkey. He treated Abram well. For her sake, he had sheep, oxen, male donkey, male and female servants, female donkey, and camel. The fact that Adam and Eve were living among livestock and able to hide amongst the trees tell you clearly that Adam and Eve were not in fact in a garden, but they were by definition resident labor working in someone else's plantation. You and I both know that a garden is a small piece of land. And we also know that farms and plantations have crops and livestock. The difference between a farm and a plantation is a plantation owner use resident laborers like Adam and Eve.